everyone, I wanted to make a quick video about justifying better paragraphs. Now, the pro tip number one if you're going to be justifying paragraphs is to first do it in Adobe InDesign. There are other platforms that we're used to like Illustrator or Photoshop or XD or Figma, whatever else it might be, but if you're going to be doing print material where you're going to have justified paragraphs, Adobe InDesign is the only one that has the features to give you the most beautiful paragraphs. I'm going to start by getting that text tool and bringing in a paragraph. I've saved one from an email series, and I've already gone ahead and we can justify this. Now once I pull these down so you can see all the text, there are a number of things that are going wrong here. First, there are big holes in rivers in these paragraphs. The word spacing in this line is huge compared to the word spacing in this line, which both of those are huge compared to the word spacing on this line, giving us tons of different word spacing widths. If I pull in a pencil, for example, we'll just mark this up really quickly. You can see that we have big, huge gaps in here, 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 so on and so forth. And then we even have things like rivers that run through here, which are gaps that almost align so that there's a big white line through that paragraph. What we're trying to do when we justify is get rid of these moments in the paragraph that are going to detract from the reading and ultimately detract from our typographic layouts. So what we'll do is we'll duplicate this paragraph and we'll get rid of my annotations so that we have a clear palette to compare to. And I'm going to open up the justification panel. You can find the justification panel by going to Window, type in Tables, Paragraph, which is going to look similar to the paragraph panel over in the Properties panel. Holy peas. And then you're going to go to More Options and select Justification. Similarly, we could have selected Command Option Shift J on a Mac. Now this is going to bring up a little table that gives us a range of values. First is word spacing. So this is the space between the words, and right now the range is between 80%, which is it's able to reduce down to 80%, and a maximum of 133%, which means that it can stretch the space between words up to 133%. Now for those of you who know math or can do it quickly in your heads, that's a 53% difference that one line can have compared to the next, which is huge. There are other things down here, letter spacing, which is the space between letters, and glyph scaling, which have zero range. So Adobe InDesign's defaults don't actually change any letter spacing or glyph scaling. It relies all on word spacing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring some of those values down so that our word spacing gets a little bit closer. Instead of 80, I'm going to set something like 95. We'll keep it tight, and we'll change this one to 115 instead. I'm going to check preview, and immediately you can see that something's changing in that middle paragraph when I check and uncheck that preview box. Then I'm going to change that letter spacing. I'm going to give us a minus 5% here, which means it can make words tighter, and a 5% there, which means it can make words a little bit wider. Then this one gets probably most controversial for type designers, which is glyph scaling. Glyph scaling means that any character that has a counter space, like a lowercase d or lowercase o, can stretch X amount of percent. Right now it's set to 0, so if we set it to something like 97 and 103 just to start with, then we'll start to see what happens in this character and what's happening in this paragraph. Immediately you can see once this is previewed how many things have changed. It looks like the top line of our paragraph is compressed enough to bring settings up, so we no longer have a hyphen on that first line, which is something we want. That's brought up a number of other lines. And later on we have fine, that's fine, that word there, that sentence there, coming up to this line here, and eventually making up some other spaces, and ultimately getting to a more even tone. If I apply those things, we'll go back into our preview mode. Now when I start to draw where the holes are, it's much harder to find. The spacings in this kind of a line are very close to the spacing in this line, which are also very close to these ones. Because of those features that we just changed, or those values that we just changed, InDesign is working very hard to make that paragraph more even looking. If this paragraph didn't look quite the way we wanted to, and depending on the typeface or the size of the type, we can open up that justification panel, keep that preview box checked, and you can arrow key these things around and dial in to your ultimate settings, your preferred settings. Basically now, instead of having all of the work of justification done in the word spacing with a 53% range, we now only have a 20% range between 95% and 115%. And then another 10% we put into letter spacing, and 6 we put back into glyph scaling. Ultimately, we're allowing InDesign to make the better decisions on where to break words and giving it a little bit more rope to play with tighter constraints if that's somehow possible. Then there's only one more thing to do to tidy up our paragraphs. We're gonna go up into Window again, type in Tables, and we're gonna find this story panel. Now, I don't know why InDesign doesn't set this as a default. They really should, but it's an optical margin alignment checkbox. You can see when I check that box that my hyphens that are in those lines come outside of that paragraph, giving the edge a cleaner look. In our default paragraph or our control paragraph, you can see that the punctuation, like the commas or the hyphens, sometimes apostrophes, we don't have too many apostrophes in this paragraph, they get indented. So what happens is that when we look at this edge of the paragraph, it really looks like this sort of dented line. Versus when we use story and we get this nice, beautiful straight line because it's pushed those smaller characters that were harder to see outside of that paragraph bounds. When I go back into my grid, you can see how now the hyphens of these words here, which usually we try to avoid hyphenated first lines, but those hyphens have gone now into the gutter a little bit. You can see in some characters like this capital T here, that top left arm has also gone to the gutter versus this side. And ultimately, InDesign is working to make a more even and clean edge. Just one last look at what adjusting those small settings have done for us. You can see this paragraph here in the red is actually the changed paragraph, and the one that is in black now is what our default was, or our control. And you can see just how much of a difference that makes, even from one line to the next. You can see how it's compressing words and what it's sort of pulling up for us. And ultimately we can see why we need to just apply those few simple rules to our justified paragraphs, leaving us with beautiful, amazing paragraphs.